Recently, I've talked with two community members who made completely different projects, but they both used a similar technique, which was using wire to add stability and rigidity to their project. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized how underrated this technique is because we don't see it too often, but there's a lot of great properties of using wire in your build for all sorts of different things. And that's why in today's video, I'm going to talk about some different solutions that you might use this for and how to secure wire to your builds so you can take advantage of this underrated technique. Now, first of all, why would you want to do this? In one of the two builds that I mentioned earlier was Matt's shed that he built. It's a massive storage shed used for storing different things like a boat or a camper. And he actually ran a wire from the ground on one side all the way up through the conduit, up to the peak of the roof, all the way down the other side, and then to the ground on the other side. And he kind of did this, as you can imagine, it's running through and then pulled tight to the ground. And this helped prevent swaying from the wind. Now, he had a ton of different techniques that he used in the build that all contributed to this kind of anti-sway design. And whenever we release that interview, you'll see those different techniques. But in this video, we're just highlighting the wire, and that just kind of pulled it tight to the ground and just added a lot of rigidity and stability in that way. And similar to that was Kevin's trellis, where he had the vertical wall trellis and he was concerned with, the plants climbing up, and as it had more weight on this vertical unsupported wall pretty much, he basically just ran a wire up and then pulled it tight to the ground in the same way that Matt did. But he did it because he was concerned about the stability of the vertical wall there as the plants climbed up and then wind came and everything like that. And I think both of those are really common examples of how you might use it outdoors to anchor projects. But I could also see it being used to actually add tension to a build, similar to maybe like you see with a suspension bridge. The wires are being used to support the main platform that the cars are driving on. You can imagine that you have a shelf or something like that, and you actually can use wires in your build suspended from the conduit holding up the shelf, or even just supporting the shelf. So if you have a lot of weight on it and it's kind of pulling down on that shelf, the wire and the tension of the wire will become strong, and that tensile strength that you're gaining will provide strength for your shelf. And that's actually something that you want to keep in mind. As you can see, wire, whenever it's just kind of loose like this, it's not really strong. It's just bendable, not really doing anything. But when it's pulled tight, it becomes a whole different material, and you want to make sure to take advantage of the material by pulling it tight, and you want to use it strategically in different ways. So with that said, let's talk about how you can attach it to your build and how you might actually use the wire to add stability and rigidity. The first option that I want to mention is what Matt used in his shed build, where basically just took advantage of the hollowness of conduit and ran the wire through the tube, as you can see there. You could also potentially just drill through the conduit wall and then have that be your entry point for the wire. And this technique is most useful if you're doing what Matt was doing, where basically you have the ground on one side that you anchor and start the wire, and then you go all the way up through the build and then down to the other side and anchor on the other side. But you alternatively might want to have a wire that starts on the ground and is anchored to the ground and then goes up to a point in your build. And you could do that in a few different ways. One is to get the end clamp from the adjustable angle connector and put this on the piece of conduit, as you can see here, and then use this point at the end to loop your wire through and then have that be your point in your build. But of course, you would have to have a piece of conduit that's sticking off of it enough to be able to connect this. But if you've got a build in place that you want to just add a connection point, you could potentially use a puzzle piece clamp, as I have it here, where basically you take your wire, and something I wanted to mention is you can get wire at Lowe's or Home Depot, different places like that. You can get different sizes, different types, and some of it's coated, some of it's not, and there's all kinds of different options, and you can basically get it cut to whatever length that you want. And you just want to make a loop out of it, as I have here. And it's really important that the wire doesn't kink. So they have this piece of hardware that you can use to make sure that doesn't happen. Or you can also take advantage of just the round nature of conduit. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But you want to use this wire cable clamp to basically squeeze the wire, and allows you to create the loop that you can use to connect in your build. And in this scenario, you could basically just take the puzzle piece clamp, use the bolt that you need for it, and basically run the bolt through this this loop on the end, and then now you have this anchor point in your build that you could run to the ground or wherever. And if you're doing something that's going to be under a lot of tension, you might want to reinforce this bolt so it doesn't bend, and you could just put a couple of nuts in there or washers or some kind of spacer to basically just you know, kind of reinforce that so this isn't just pulling directly on the bolt. That's another option. And it's kind of overkill though, because we've got the conduit here. We can just go directly around the conduit. And one option is what Kevin did in his trellis, where basically the wire just wrapped around the conduit and then went down on both sides, and he just anchored it to the ground. And just taking advantage of the conduit, it won't kink the wire, which is good. Like I said, you don't want that to happen. Then you could just add that cable clamp that I showed you on this side to basically just loop it around the conduit. And something that you should keep in mind is you could just use the connectors in your build, as I have here, to basically have that point that you connect the wire to. So if I have this corner that goes all the way down to the ground that I want to anchor with this wire, then I can just use this corner connection and just loop the wire around, as you can see there, and you don't have to worry about it kinking, and you don't have to worry about adding another connector because you already have this one in your build, which will just save you money in the long run. And then another option that I thought of is adding a threaded pipe insert in the end of the conduit, as you can see here, and threading in an eye hook all the way through, and then using that as your connection point for the loop, and then going down to the ground or wherever else. And something I wanted to mention is you could be doing it in this scenario, like I said, where you're anchoring to your build and then going down to the ground. But if you're doing what we talked about with like a suspension bridge, where you want to do between this corner all the way down in the corner in the very back, then you could use a combination of this method with the puzzle piece clamp, or just go around the outside of the connector here down to the corner. But you basically, as I said earlier, you just want to take advantage of the wire and use it to add that strength and just make it tight between the two connection points. And if you are going to be connecting it and anchoring it to the ground, you might want to use something like this Vortex spiral ground anchor. I really like these a lot. We've talked about them on the channel a few different times, and I've got my wire all wrapped around it. But basically, I like these a lot because they just twist into the ground and then add an anchor point that you can hook your wire onto and then anchor your build. We used these in a greenhouse project a while back, where we used a ratchet strap hooked to this and then onto the build. And that worked really well, so that's something to keep in mind. And you might also do something like Kevin, where he actually just used these types of eye hooks and screwed it into his garden bed and then hooked the wire onto that to secure it in place. There's all kinds of different options for securing it and anchoring the wire, but once you get it connected to your build, that's the main thing. And we talked about a few different ways that you can do that, and I'm sure there's others. As always, I know you guys are going to have some creative things that you use this for, and we can't wait to see it. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and a thumbs up, and consider subscribing. We appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next video.